अग्रजातं सहगणरघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीशाखान्वितांश्च नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामी इति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नाम्ने गौरत्विषे नमः। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोस्तुते तप्तकाञ्चन गौरांगी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी ऋषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार शिवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So sorry to keep you waiting. Actually, my father had come and was on a phone call to America, so it just got a little delayed. So we were now on the seventh verse of the Nectar of Instruction. So if you remember, we discussed the sixth verse talk about Sangha, association. And now after association, Adau Shraddha Sadhu Sangha Bhajana Kriya. So now there are different ways in this, in ways in which the flow of Nectar of Instruction can be analyzed. It's not that one flow is normative and this is the only way it has to be. So at one level we can say this and the next verse are very advanced levels of devotion. But if you look at it progressively, now the way Srila Prabhupada explains, Srila Prabhupada may take a talk about advanced concepts even when he's talking about Prayasa and Prajalpa and Yamagraha. He may talk about how we should avoid Prajalpa so that we can practice Bhajan Kriya nicely, how we can come to Anartha Nivritti Nishtha. So the point which I am making is that in one analytical framework, it may well be that Atyahar Prayas, the first three verses, are just at the stage of Shraddha. But if we analyze them further, it is not that only at the level of Shraddha we have to avoid Atyahar Prayasa Prajalpa. Even when we come to Bhajana Kriya, at that time also we have to avoid. And when we come to Ruchi Asakti, at that time naturally we will avoid these things. So these 9 stages of Bhakti are not like discrete. So discrete means sometimes you have this step ends over here and then this step starts. This stage ends over here, then this stage starts. Then this stage starts. It's not like that. They are like a staircase. So on a staircase means that the previous step that you have climbed, that elevation that one has achieved, that elevation is not lost when one climbs the next step. That elevation is still there, but one has gone one level higher. So that means it is not that when I come to the level of Nishtha, I have no longer a need for Sadhu Sangha. It's not that I have no longer a need for Bhajana Kriya. No, those are already there, but we build up on them further. So they are not like links in a chain, rather they are steps on a staircase. So that's how they are progressive, in the sense that they take us higher and higher upwards. So that way we understand that say Atyahar Prayas Prajalpa, they can also be understood for us sadhakas who are trying to come to the level of Anartha Nivritti, and we are trying to move from Anartha Nivritti towards Nishtha. But they can also be seen that even when a person is practicing, there has to be some level of these things so that one can practice effectively. So let's move forward now and look at verse 7, which talks about how one should persist in the chanting of the holy names. Syat Krishna Nam Charita Pisita Pyavidya Krishna Nam Charita Pisita Pyavidya Pitopataptarasanasya Naro Chikanu Upataptarasanasya Naro Chikanu किन्त्वादरादनुदिनं खलु सैव जुष्ट्वा खलु दिनं सैव जुष्टा स्वाद्विक्रमाद् भवति तद्गदमूलहन्त्री क्रमाद् भवति तद्गदमूलहन्त्री. So here it is said Syat Krishna Nama Charitapi. So generally we talk about chanting of the holy names is very important. Yes, it is. But chanting of the holy names is not an isolated activity. It is connected with all the various activities which center on Krishna. So we have in the Mangalarti also Madhurya Leela Guna Rupa Nam. So Leela, Guna, Rupa Nam, they are all connected. Similarly here, so Krishna Nam Charit Adi. So Nam is one thing, but along with that there are the pastimes, there are the glories, there are the qualities. So all these are connected. So all of them, they in the experience of a sadhaka have a particular nature. So Sita. So the word Sita refers to sweetness over here. So that which is sweet, like we have this word Sitafal, there's a fruit. So actually it refers historic, there is Sitafal, there is Ramafal also. But the idea is the word Sita also means sweet. So Sitapya Avidya. So it is, this name of Krishna is sweet. But because of avidya, because of ignorance, and then what happens because of ignorance? This taste is lost. An example is given. Pitopatapta rasanasya narochikanu. So pitopatapta. So tapta is burning or afflicted. So pitopatapta. Now there are different ways of analyzing things. So for example, modern allopathic medicine analyzes the body in a particular way. It talks about certain chemicals which are present, and the chemicals increase, then there is an imbalance. And that's why we have various, when a person has disease, we have varieties of tests. Okay, is the WBC count gone down? Is the RBC count gone down? So primarily, the modern allopathic science analyzes in terms of the body, in terms of the balance of biochemicals. So that is with respect to physiology, and with respect to anatomy, there is the structural alignment and proportion of the various limbs and organs of the body. So that is one way of analyzing the body. The other is more in terms of the balance of the comprising ingredients. That is what Ayurveda does. So Ayurveda analyzes in terms of the balance of Kapha, Vata and Pitta. So now, what are these two different frames of analysis? Just like if you have a map. Now sometimes if you have your diary, in the diary there may be a map of India, which is first a political map. Then there may be a topographical map. Political map, there are the boundaries of the various districts, the boundaries of the various states, they will be given. And then there may be a topographical map. That there, okay, this area is a plateau, this area is a plain, this area is a mountainous area, this area is the place where a river is going on. So then the topographical features, topography refers to the surface geology, this nature of the surface of the earth. So topographical features might be prominent. So some other places, there might be, some other map might be a communication based map. Now for example, okay, there is a railway from here to here, there's a flight from here to here, there's a road from here to here. That is the primary focus in the map. So all three are maps of the same geographical reality. But based on the analytical framework's focus, certain features will be highlighted and certain features will not be highlighted. So just as the same territory can have different maps, similarly the same body can be analyzed in different ways. So allopathy and Ayurveda are basically different systems for analyzing the same body. So here Rupa Goswami does not refer to any particular disease by name. He just says Pitopatapta, that when a person is afflicted by excessive Pitta. So when there's an imbalance in Pitta, then normally speaking there's Kapha, Vata, Pitta. So these roughly correlate with the solid, liquid and gaseous content within the body. So Kapha correlates with the solid content, Pitta correlates with the liquid content, the liquid which also transforms into the heat content. heat and energy, and the vata corresponds with the air content, the gaseous content. This is a rough correlation. There are differences also further. For example, when we talk about prana vayu in Ayurveda or in Vedic parlance, it is not just oxygen. Modern science says that oxygen is what is required for survival, which is true. Oxygen is required, but prana vayu is oxygen and more. Oxygen is required for survival, but oxygen which is circulating around in the body in a proper way to maintain the functioning of the body, that is called as prana. So there are two different ways of looking at the body, and some things may be intersecting. Just like when the map is the same, whether it's a political map or it's a topographical map or it's a communication map, okay, it's talking about the same country of India. And in that, okay, there will be Mumbai, there will be Calcutta, there will be Delhi. The basic geographical landmarks may be the same. So like that, whether it's Ayurveda or allopathy, okay, there are eyes, there are ears, there is nose. The organs remain the same. But the way the analysis is done varies. So here, this Pitopatapta, which is not explicitly identified by the Swarupa Goswami's verse, that is identified here as jaundice by our acharyas. They explain that. Now, there are various kinds of diseases that can come because of pitta, that is bile, and there are varieties of diseases. And some of them, it's a family of diseases that cause perversion of the taste. But the most widespread and the most familiar among those diseases is jaundice. That's why jaundice is compared to it. It's correlated with jaundice. Just like in the 15th chapter, Krishna uses the word Ashwatha. Now, Ashwatha, if you see from a general point of view, it refers to a tree in the fig branch of trees. So, specifically Prabhupada says this refers to banyan tree. Now, if you look at the Sanskrit dictionary, Ashwatha does not necessarily have to refer only to banyan. It can refer to it, but the way Krishna describes it further, Krishna says that, okay, some roots are going up, some roots are going down, there are multiple roots. So to give us a visual understanding of that, banyan is the tree which has that kind of sub-branches and additional roots. So Prabhupada uses that. So here, Pitopatapta. To understand this, we can use the example of jaundice. So now when a person is jaundiced, there is this specific distortion or inversion of the taste. Normally, in most diseases, there is a cessation of the appetite. When people are sick, most people don't feel like eating anything. Of course, wanting to eat a lot is also a kind of sickness, but that's a different kind of thing. But when there is actually fever or something, one of the things is that one doesn't feel like eating. So even if there are tasty items, they don't seem like tasty. So this loss of taste can be a general experience for many diseases. That is a characteristic of Pitopatapta. But specifically with respect to jaundice, one characteristic is that sweet does not appear as sweet. Often in diseases, whether it is sweet or not, I just don't feel like eating it. I feel I may vomit it, I will not be able to digest it. I don't want to eat it. But specifically with respect to jaundice, what happens is that when a person eats sweet, the sweet does not taste sweet, rather it tastes tasteless or even bitter. So, Pitopatapta rasanasya narochikanu. So, very clearly the focus is on rasanasya. Rasana is the tongue. So, rasana is also a drink, but that is R-A-S-N-A. This is R-A-S-A-N-A. So, rasana. Rasana is here, it is the tongue, that which tastes. So, that is that which is tasty. That's the idea of that rasana. So, that which is tasty. But rasanasya, that with which we taste. Rasanasya na rochikanu. So that means the tongue is not able to taste it as sweet. Now actually this is one of the great one of the unsolved mysteries of science. And on the 125th anniversary of one of the major magazines of science, scientists made a list of several major unanswered questions in science. So one of the questions was, where does the universe come from? Another question was, where does consciousness come from? Another is, where are our memories stored? So they are foundational questions. Why do we dream when we sleep? There are many questions like this. Now, see, according to Darwinian evolution, Everything is for survival. So now what survival value do dreams provide? It's a big puzzle. When they try to reduce everything down to a particular framework, it finds that many things are not explainable. So one of the inexplicable things in science is actually how do we experience sensory stimuli? Who is the experiencer? That means if I taste a gulab jamun, so now the gulab jamun is unconscious, isn't it? It's not the gulab jamun in the plate will be dancing, oh, I am so sweet, I am so sweet, I am so sweet. Now, similarly, actually the tongue is also made of dead matter only. From the scientific perspective, the gulab jamun and the tongue are made of the same functional elements basically. So, the gulab jamun doesn't taste itself. Does the tongue by itself taste it? Now, if I disconnect the tongue from the body and keep the tongue in front of the plate or get the tongue in touch with the gulab jamun, there will be no taste over there. Isn't it? If a person is dead and you put a gulab jamun on the dead person's tongue, there will be no taste over there. So who is it that is actually experiencing the taste of the gulab jamun, and how is that being experienced? So that is not there is no clear answer to this. So actually the gulab jamun's taste is experienced by the soul because of its attachment and because of its misidentification. Just like I gave the example earlier, when a person is watching a movie, and sometimes when people are watching movies, what happens is, if the villain suddenly, boom, punches the hero, and the hero falls, and people who are watching, what happened? People also jerk back. So they feel as if the blow has hit them. So actually nothing has happened to them. But why do they feel like that? Because of misidentification. So, because of misidentification, that which is not happening to us, we experience it as if happening to us. But for misidentification to happen, there has to be somebody to misidentify. Isn't it? If a movie is just being played and nobody is watching the movie, then no matter how much the hero gets beaten, there will be no one shocked by that. So what happens is, so if there were no soul who would be experiencing the sensory stimuli and the tongue, if there would be no independent source of consciousness, no matter how tasty and how many the gulab jamun that are placed on the tongue, nothing will happen. So, now here what has been? Rasanasya narochikanu. That means the gulab jamun is sweet, that sweet item is sweet, and the soul is also present. The soul has the capacity to experience that, but there's no experience. So if the villain is beating the hero, but suddenly the screen goes blank. The spectator is there is observing. The villain is getting beaten, but there is no emotion that is experienced because the interface is broken. So like that, what happens? The rasanasya narochikanu. That here what is happening is said that the sweetness is there, and the soul is also capable of experiencing the sweetness. But because the tongue has lost the taste, so they cannot experience. Similarly, Kintva adarad anudinam khalusaiva jushta. But adarad, if one respectfully chants the holy names, khalusaiva jushta, swadvi kramad bhavati. Gradually the taste will awaken. And when the taste awakens, tadgad moolahantri. Then the disease will be rooted out from its very foundations. So now there are various different ways by which a disease can be treated. And in Ayurveda, also there are many different ways for treating diseases. One of the methods of Ayurvedic therapy for treating jaundice is the administration of sweet items. So for example, a person is told to drink sugarcane juice. Now sugarcane juice and is normally sweet, and people will be happy to drink it. But in the case of jaundice, it doesn't taste as sweet. But still, if a person drinks it, gradually that imbalance of pitta gets removed, and then the person is able to relish it gradually. Now similarly, this is how the holy name works. So to understand this, now normally what happens when we give the example of a movie, normally the movie conveys something of unreality. Something which is unreal. Say in a movie something is happening and somebody is being beaten by somebody else. All this is illusory, but we are identifying with it. And that's how we are experiencing some emotions. But the same is in reality also. The same principle is there, that if you have to experience something, we have we should have to have the means for experiencing. If I don't have the means to experience, just like when the painkiller is there, the pain is there in the body, but the medium through which the pain is experienced, that medium is disabled. The nervous systems, the nerves especially over there are disabled, and the person doesn't experience the pain. So same way, Krishna is sweet. Krishna is, as I say, Madhuram Madhurebhyopi. The holy name is sweeter among sweetest. And then we have that Madhurashtakam also, Adaram Madhuram, Vadanam Madhuram. All parts of Krishna are sweet. So Krishna is sweet. And the soul has a natural capacity to experience the sweetness of Krishna. But the medium that is there, that is faulty. What is that medium? That medium is the diseased consciousness of the soul. So just as there is this earlier, now what am I comparing? So actually there are, maybe things may become a little confusing here. There are three different things which are being talked about over here. Or I say four actually. What four? First is that I give the example of a disease. In the case of the disease, which is the example given here in Updeshamrut. So there is the person who is the eater, there is the sweet eatable, and there is the tongue. So the eatable is sweet, the person is capable of experiencing the sweetness, but the medium, the tongue, is not there. Or the example of the watching the TV program or movie, the action is happening in the movie, and the person is capable of experiencing emotion as per the action, but the intermediate, the screen is broken. So similarly, if we go back, Krishna is sweet, the soul has the capacity to experience the sweetness of Krishna, but the medium is lost. Now what is that medium? In this case, that is our diseased consciousness. So that diseased consciousness is the consciousness that is attracted to matter, that is entangled in matter and material things, in the hope that material enjoyment will make one happy. So how is this consciousness cured? That is cured by the practice of Bhakti Yoga. And in that, just as that which tastes as tasteless, if one keeps tasting it, then it will start appearing tasty over a period of time. Similarly, that which seems utterly unrelishable, not so relishable, like the holy names of Krishna, the pastimes of Krishna, they will become relishable by regular practice. So what exactly happens? How is it that the holy name becomes relishable? Now we know that the disease is removed in the case of jaundice, and then it becomes relishable. But what exactly happens when we are chanting the holy names? How does it become relishable? Now when we say become relishable, it is not that the holy name is becoming relishable, it is becoming relishable to us. The holy name is always relishable, just like the gulab jamun or the sugarcane juice is always sweet. But the sweetness becomes apparent to a person. So the soul is here, the objects, whether it is material, there are material sense objects and there are spiritual sense objects also. Spiritual sense objects means the objects which are connected with Krishna but which are experienced through our senses. So for example, the deities are spiritual sense objects. So now the mind has a default restlessness. As Arjuna says, Chanchalam hi manah Krishna. He says Chanchala. He talks about in 6.33-34 that the mind is very restless. Why is the mind restless? Because it has a frantic need and hope for pleasure. I want to enjoy, I want to enjoy, I want to enjoy, I want to enjoy. That is an innate need, and that need comes originally from the soul, which is Satchitananda. So Ananda is the nature of the soul. Now the mind has experienced many objects in the hope of pleasure, and none of those objects have made the mind happy. So because of that, the mind has developed a default tendency that even when one is experiencing the object, the mind knows, okay, this is not going to last. So immediately the mind starts thinking of a next object. What will I get next object to enjoy? Next object to enjoy. Now sometimes if there's a big festival, and at the end of the festival there is a big feast, then what happens? If the big feast is there, then we may have nice, there may be pulava and there may be pakoda and the paratha, nice items are there. But even when we are eating, the mind is, what is the next item that is going to come? What is the next item going to come? Next item going to come. So what happens? Rather than relishing what is there, the mind is just craving. What is next? What is next? What is next? So that way, the mind has, by its past experience with how material objects are unsatisfactory, it, even while experiencing an object, it is craving for the next object. So like that, the mind is always restless. That way, now the mind keeps us restless. It stays restless, it keeps us restless. Now when we come to Krishna, Krishna is not like any other material object. If we come to Krishna, the mind can experience unlimited happiness in Krishna. But because of its past habit of just looking for new objects. So what happens when the mind comes to Krishna also? The mind doesn't stay in Krishna. The mind thinks, I want something new. I want something new. And then there is a resistance. The mind, even when we try to fix it on Krishna, the mind says, no, I will not stay. I just want to go to new things. And then we have to struggle to bring it back. And what happens is, most of our energy goes off in this struggle. And that's why the contact with Krishna is limited. So where is the disease? The holy name or Krishna is sweet, and the soul is capable of experiencing that sweetness. In fact, it's the nature of the soul to realize the sweetness of Krishna. But the interface is the subtle body, the mind primarily, which is default restless. And that's why we can't relish the sweetness. So what is the disease? The disease is the restlessness. Now, what happens is, how will this restlessness be cured? It is, you just forcibly let the mind experience Krishna again and again and again. And then eventually the mind will realize, actually this is much better than many of the other things that I am doing. The mind has to sort of realize it. So when we say realization, who is it that gets the realization? It's the soul who gets the realization. We are the souls. But actually, realization happens when the mind accepts something. For example, by intelligence, I may accept that sense gratification leads to misery. But still, the hope for sense gratification remains. Why? Because the mind is still hoping. I will enjoy. But when the mind accepts, there is no enjoyment over there. That becomes a realization. So what a realization, for example, now, we may be attracted by, say, we may be attracted by sex. But we may not be attracted by meat. If you're going, traveling by bus or by train or by plane, some people are eating meat, that may not agitate us. Why? Because the mind is itself, there's no pleasure in this. So what has happened? Realization means when the mind accepts it. So when the mind accepts it, that is like the cure of the disease. So when will this disease get cured? You repeatedly expose the mind to Krishna again and again and again and again. And by that repeated exposure to Krishna, the mind doesn't want to get exposed to Krishna because the mind feels, but by its past experiences it feels, I'll not get any happiness. But when we are repeatedly exposed, the mind will eventually realize, actually this makes me happy. I thought it doesn't make me happy, but it does make me happy. And if you see, in material enjoyment, or in sense gratification, the Prabhupada writes that the pleasure is mostly in the planning. Pleasure is in the planning. That, I'll do this and I will enjoy and all this. And then the anticipation that is there. The anticipation, people call it the thrill, the excitement. And so many words they use to enjoy, to glamorize that pleasure. But actually once one gets to it, the pleasure is very temporary. It's fleeting. And then eventually it is over. So, there is the hunt. In the hunt, there is the hope. But once the perceived object is acquired, then really there's nothing so much about it. Then people start looking for something else. And something else. So actually, George Harrison, when he was at the peak of his popularity, he was so immensely popular that at one time, when around Jupiter, there was a satellite that was discovered. So when the satellite was discovered, by popular demand, That satellite was named after Jupiter, after George Harrison. George Harrison 4145 or something, that was the name of the satellite. So, so that was the level of his popularity, and the amount of fame, amount of prestige, amount of adulation that he was getting was enormous. And still, he did not feel satisfied, felt there's something more. And then even before he met Srila Prabhupada, he met several other spiritual teachers, Indian spiritual teachers especially. And one yogi told him, he says, you are very fortunate that, if you imagine material success to be like a wall, a huge wall that has to be scaled. So he says, most people spend their life struggling to climb up that wall. To get fame, to get the association of the beautiful members of the opposite sex, to get sexual enjoyment, to get money, to get power, to get these things. Most people struggle to climb up the wall, and most people don't succeed in climbing up the wall only. They just get some way up to the wall, or they don't get at all up to the way up the wall. So he says very few people get up to the wall. And actually the wall is such that no matter how high you go up, there is still higher up. Something is remaining. It never, in one sense, it never ends. But he said, you have got, and then you have been able to see that there is nothing beyond the wall. There has to be something higher in life. There has to be something greater in life. So now, the realization that material life is not enough, that there is something more in life which is required, that realization is very fortunate if somebody gets it. Jabala Upanishad says that the moment one gets vairagya, one should renounce the world. So many people say that actually the Vedic system is brahmachari, grahastha, vanaprastha, then sannyas. Why do you renounce right in the youth itself? That's not proper. Well, it's true. The normal system is brahmachari, grahastha, vanaprastha, sannyas. But Jabala Upanishad is very clear. If somehow somebody gets that realization, that conviction, then one doesn't have to go through the normal process. It is renunciation. The moment one gets renunciation, renounce. In the Mayavadi Sampradayas, when sannyas is given, how they give sannyas is quite instructive. Generally, they give did I discuss this in my earlier class? No. So they normally have their sannyas ceremony on the banks of a river. Especially the established Mayavadi Sampradayas, they have it, for example, in Varanasi, on the Manikarnika Ghat. So there what they do, the person who is going to take sannyas, they build a funeral pyre for him. And then he is actually expected to lie down on the funeral pyre. And then after he lies down on the funeral pyre, then they light the funeral pyre. But he comes off from the funeral pyre. He doesn't burn. But the idea is that when he lies down on the funeral pyre and the funeral pyre is set on fire, that means the person is socially dead. And then when the person comes out, that means the person is living only for the pursuit of moksha. So, that idea of renunciation is what? One recognizes that the purpose of life is something greater than worldly enjoyment. Something higher. So, if now, we may not get that realization immediately, but even if we get some conviction of pursuing that direction, that is also good. So once one gets that, the mind, by repeated exposure to Krishna, recognizes, oh, there is something better. In material life, there are people who get so much misery. But the mind, having no experience of something higher, keeps staying in that zone itself. Generally, we think that, okay, if I realize how miserable material existence is, then I'll become detached from it. No, it doesn't necessarily work like that. There are many doctors, and doctors see so much misery. They see so much disease, so much pain, so much death. But does that make them detached from material existence? No, it doesn't. They still have their hopes for enjoyment, they still have their schemes for enjoyment, and just the perception of the misery of material existence doesn't necessarily lead to realization. And that realization comes by the practice of dharma. When one practices dharma, what happens is the practice of dharma gives one higher taste. And only when there is a higher taste to compare with the lower taste, then one understands this lower taste is lower and I should give it up. But otherwise, if there is no higher taste to compare it with, then although I understand this taste is not satisfactory, I think if I get the taste in some other object, it will be satisfactory. Or some other object will satisfy, some other object will be satisfactory. And that's why the person stays in a perpetual state of dissatisfaction, but never comes to know where I will find satisfaction. So that's why we see that, even when now Vedic scriptures say that there is for people, most people Grahastha ashram is recommended. So Grahastha ashram gradually offers a method for purification of one's material desires. But it is not that there are so many people who get married. But what happens when they are dissatisfied in marriage? They often go in for extramarital affairs. They go in for so many other things. Because even when one gets dissatisfied in material life, that does not mean one will start aspiring for spiritual life. So, dissatisfaction in material life is not the qualification for starting spiritual life. The qualification for starting spiritual life is actually some experience of spiritual life. That may come by the association of devotees, that may come by one's past samskaras from one's previous life, that may come by one's own study and understanding of scripture. Generally, it has some special mercy that comes. So now for us, we have some experience of the higher taste and we have some experience of the lower taste. Or no, we have some experience of the higher taste and a lot of experience of the lower taste. So what happens is that when we are comparing this at a subconscious level, often, although the higher taste is higher, but even when the higher taste is experienced, the mind, because of its default restlessness, just leaves the higher taste and starts exploring, is there something new? And then in the exploring of newness, it again comes back to the lower taste. And it stays on the lower taste. But if we keep forcing it, come on, keep hearing the holy names, keep studying scripture, keep serving Krishna, then gradually one starts recognizing this is truly relishable. What does Bhaktivinoda Thakur say in his song Atma Nivedan? He says, Seva sukha peye mane. Does anyone know that song? Ami to tomar, tumi to amar, ki kaja paradhane, purva itihas bhulinu sakala, seva sukha peye mane. So he's saying that when I start practicing bhakti, what will I do? Purva itihasa bhulinu sakala. Purva itihasa. All my past history that is there, all the different ways I have sought out material enjoyment, it is there. Bhulinu sakal. I'll forget it all. Forget it all. I won't bother about it. And seva sukha peye mane. I'll relish that seva sukha. But how? With the mind. So I'll absorb the mind in the joy of service. And then what will happen as I start experiencing, relishing this? Amito tomar, tumito amar. I am yours, you are mine. Kikaja paradhane. What other pleasure do I not? What other treasure do I want? Nothing else that I want. So this is seva sukha peye mane. Oh mind, just stay fixed in Krishna. So this is the way gradually the disease of material existence get cured. Kintva adarad anudinam khalu saiva jushta. Adarad. So there are three things talking about. Adarad, anudinam and jushta. Adarad means respectfully. I mean, one understand that even if the holy name doesn't taste relishable for me, but I understand this is Krishna, this is supremely sweet. And just as, in one sense, if a sick person is taking medicine, the person values the medicine. Now normally when we go to a doctor and we take the medicine not for its taste, but for its effect. When we approach a medicine, the purpose is clear. It's not taste, it's effect. Even if it tastes bitter, even if it tastes tasteless, if it is going to cure me, I'll take it. So on what basis do we take it? It's based on our intelligence. And that's why children may oppose taking a medicine. They may resist, no, I don't want to take this. And the parents will have to force it. So unfortunately, when we practice bhakti, we often confuse the taste and the effects. The purpose. When we start practicing bhakti, we have to recognize that taste is not something which will come immediately. But the effect is there. Even with our little practice of bhakti for a few years, we can clearly see that the lust is decreased, the anger is decreased, the greed has decreased. That has happened. And that will happen more and more as we keep practicing bhakti. So if we are clear, why am I taking this? It's not, even if I don't get taste, it doesn't matter. The effect will be there. And as the effect continues more and more, the taste will come. So, I'll give an example to illustrate this. As a child may not want to take the medicine. So, when a child is sick, the mother takes the child to the doctor. And the doctor tells, okay, take this medicine, morning, afternoon, evening. Take this 2 spoonful, 2 spoonful, 2 spoonful. Now, whom does the mother tell it to? Sorry, whom does the doctor tell it to? The mother or the child? Mother. But who has to take the medicine? Child. Now, the doctor is there only for a short while. Maybe once a week or once a month or whatever. The doctor is there. The responsibility of ensuring that the medicine is taken is with the mother. So, in this case, the example is that the guru is like the doctor. The intelligence is like the mother. The mind is like the child. And the medicine is like the holy name. The holy name is like the medicine. That means the spiritual master, he will be there. He will give classes, he will give some counseling if it is required, or his representatives will give us some guidance. But they are not going to be there round the clock for us. So the spiritual master, when they give instruction, whom do they give it to? That is to be intelligence. We have to be at the level of intelligence and understand what is being spoken. And when they speak it that way, we understand it. And then we take responsibility. Krishna says in 3.43, Evam buddhe param buddhva samsthabhyatmanam atmanah jai shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durasudam. So with intelligence, situate oneself on the transcendental platform. Evam buddhe param buddhva. So it's very important. Jiva Goswami also says in Sandarbhas that in the Siddha stage, Preeti keeps one on the spiritual platform. One loves Krishna, that's why one stays on the spiritual platform. But in the sadhaka stage, buddhi keeps one on the spiritual platform. In the sadhaka stage, it is our buddhi. With our intelligence, understand this is good, this is not good. This is short term, this is long term. This is harmful, this is helpful. And that way, I stay on the spiritual platform. So that's why the intelligence is very important. Just as with intelligence, a person understands that I take a medicine not for its taste, it's not for its taste, but for its effect. Similarly, we understand with intelligence that I am practicing Krishna consciousness not just for the immediate taste, immediate pleasure that it brings, but for the long-term purification that it is going to bring. And when the purification will come, then happiness will come automatically as a result of that purification. So in fact, it is not that happiness will come, happiness will manifest. Come means it is somewhere coming from outside. Manifest means what is there, it is just coming to the surface. So the soul's nature is to be happy. That's how we start experiencing happiness. Now here, Prabhupada explains in the purport that in the end of the first paragraph he says, such a recovery of spiritual health is possible only by the regular cultivation of Krishna consciousness. So this is the word recovery of spiritual health. That means this is the healthy state is the natural state. But right now we are in an unnatural state and we have to recover our health. It was there, but it has been lost. Recovery. And then Prabhupada quotes from the Bhagavad Gita how in the disease condition we are disconnected from Krishna. We are against Krishna. He quotes 7.14, Namam Dushkrit, 7.15, Namam Dushkritno Moodha. He says that this is how in the disease condition we do not want to surrender to Krishna. But if somehow we are intelligent enough to recognize that we should start practicing spiritual life. Now there's an interesting statement at the end of another paragraph. Avidya, a misconception about one's spiritual identity, provides a foundation for ahankar or false ego within the heart. So avidya is the foundation of ahankar. Avidya means ignorance. Ahankar means misidentification, to misidentify with the body. Remember I explained Avarnatmika and Prakshipatmika Shakti? Avarnatmika means the person goes to watch a movie. Avarnatmika means what? Covering. But what is the example with respect to movie? Yeah, the lights go off. The lights go off, then person forgets to see everything. Can't see anything. And then what happens? Prakshipatmika means the lights on the screen go on. So what happens? The consciousness gets caught over there. He's attracted and captivated over there. So avidya means the inability to see what is the reality. It's like the lights going off, ignorance. And ahankar means the consciousness getting caught and misidentifying with that which is not, misidentifying with some character in the movie or whatever. So avidya is the foundation for ahankar. So now what happens is, now why is Prabhupada using the word avidya here, explaining this avidya and ahankar? Because he says, what is the last line of the verse? Tad kintva adaranudiram khalu swadvikramad bhavati tadgat moolahantri. So moolahantri, the foundation is destroyed. Syat Krishna Nam Charitadi Sitapya avidya. So avidya, that is the foundation, moolahantri. It will be removed from its foundation. Now in the process of purification by other methods, by say the process of jnana or yoga, the basic foundation of ahankar is not entirely removed. Because although one may understand that aham brahmasmi, but one doesn't understand one's complete nature. One may understand that I am not the body, I am the soul. But that is not enough. What am I to do at the level of the soul? That is important to understand. See, qualitative understanding, our qualitative oneness with Krishna brings detachment from the material things of this world. If I understand that I am spirit, the matter cannot make me happy. So that's how understanding our qualitative oneness can bring detachment. But detachment from the material things, the gross material things. But it is only understanding our quantitative subordination to Krishna that will bring detachment from the false ego. The two are different things. If I understand I am not the body, I am the soul, what will happen? I may become detached from the gross material things. But still, that conception of I-ness, that ego can become very good. I am detached from everything. And then the false ego may in fact increase because of that. Because I am detached, everybody else is attached. The I center is still there. But when I understand my quantitative subordination to Krishna, Krishna is great, I am small, then what happens is, not only there is the detachment from gross material things, but it's also the detachment from the false ego, which is actually the foundation of material existence. So, in this way, the complete avidya, tadgad moola hantri, that will not happen just by other processes of purification. That will happen only by the practice of bhakti yoga, which revives our spiritual identity, which revives our understanding of who we actually are. Now here Prabhupada says, the real disease is in the heart. Now the word heart has many meanings. At one level there is the biological heart. But that is not what is normally talked about. For example, when last month there was the Valentine's Day. So people have celebrated in the big way. They show their heart pierced with arrows. They have those symbols which they put everywhere. Now they are not obviously referring to the biological heart. Isn't it? Or somebody says, my heart was broken. That is not that the biological heart is going to get broken into pieces. So there, when we talk about heart, that is not referring to the biological heart. It refers to the metaphorical heart. Metaphorical heart. Metaphorical heart means, as a metaphor, we refer to heart as the seat of emotions. Okay, as a center, not as a center of emotions. That which is the center of my emotions. So my heart was broken means, all my emotions are distraught. I'm feeling devastated. That's what we mean by heart is broken. So normally speaking, whenever in the scriptures whenever in normal conversation also the word heart is used, it doesn't refer to the biological heart. But what it refers to is, now where are the emotions situated actually? Ultimately, all emotions come from the soul. So now the soul's emotions are rooted through the mind, through the subtle body, to the gross body. So for example, now I am sitting here, or you are sitting there. Now there is a door behind. If the door is closed, you cannot see what is beyond the door. The door is open, then you can see what is beyond. So, like that, the mind is the door to the heart. The mind is what? The door to the heart. Or you can say door from the heart also. Isn't it? The door, by the door you can go in, you can come out. So that means the soul is here, then the mind is here, and it is through the mind that the soul's consciousness get rooted outwards. So, and it is through the mind that the external stimuli come inside. So what is the heart? The heart in essence is the soul. But currently the soul is very tightly linked with the mind, because the soul doesn't have much experience of life independent of matter, life independent of subtle body. Although the soul has that capacity originally, but right now the soul doesn't have experience of that. So at our level, when we talk about purification, it is the purification of the mind that is happening. So when the purification of the mind happens, then the heart, which is the soul actually, the soul's direction, desires get properly directed. They are no longer misdirected in various ways. And that's how a person becomes purified and the person advances. If this is a little confusing, don't bother too much about it. The important point to understand is that there is a difference between a literal biological heart and the seat of emotions. That is actually the soul. So, another way to put it, to make it simple, is that the soul is the root of consciousness, R-O-O-T. And the mind is the root of consciousness, R-O-U-T-E. So, a door, there is a root and there is a root. So, this consciousness originates from the soul, but the consciousness is channelized through the mind. So, now there can be no emotions without consciousness. So, that's why now wherever our mind is, that's where we experience emotions. For example, if I'm sitting here right now, but I hear, oh, today there is a festival, and after the festival, there is going to be pav bhaji. So my mind is with the pav bhaji. So what happened? I am here, but where my mind is, that's where I experience, all my emotions will be experienced. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Mora man Vrindavan. My mind is Vrindavan. What does it mean? It's not, there is of course a place called Vrindavan. Geographically there is a place on the earth called Vrindavan. And also there is there is spiritual abode of Vrindavan. When he's saying my mind is Vrindavan, means my mind is constantly absorbed in Vrindavan. So right now, our mind is caught up in sense objects, and we need to purify that. But then Prabhupada talks about the how the purification happens. He talks about the 3 stages. There is Aparadhanam, then there is Namabhas, and then there is Shuddhanam. So, at the level of Aparadhanam, offensive chanting of the holy names, also there is benefit of chanting. But the benefit is not so much. Benefit is there, but it is not so much. At the level of Shuddhanam, even one chanting of the holy name brings supreme benefit. Sometimes it is said that you just chant the holy name once, then all the bondage of material existence will end. So you wonder, is this an exaggeration? No, I've chanted the holy name so many times, nothing has happened like that. No, it's not exaggeration. It is actually real glorification, but it is at the level of consciousness. Just like it is said, you just have to shoot one arrow in the bullseye. You will get the Olympic gold medal in archery. That's true. But before that one arrow in the bullseye can be shot, in the millions of arrows have to be shot in practice. Isn't it? And all the arrows that are shot in practice, they also have to be shot carefully. It's not that if I'm closing my eye and I'm shooting arrows here and there, I shot million arrows and so now I should get the gold medal. So it's not like that. All the arrows have to be shot with as much concentration as possible, with as to the best of one's capacity to hit the target, and eventually one will hit the target. So it's like initially the Aparadhanam means one is just shooting the arrow, not even looking at the target. There's Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Ram Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So it's just shooting somewhere. So at the level of Namabhas, one starts aiming at the target. One starts aiming. One doesn't get the target, but at least goes somewhere close to the target. So at the name of Shuddhana, one gets at the bullseye. So what happens, all our practice, all our daily chanting is meant to take us from the level of aparadhanam eventually to the level of shuddhanam. So now the important thing is that the holy name is, sometimes devotees say that actually, give this example, that the offensive chanting is not of much use. Then we start thinking, oh, my chanting is, I'm committing so many offenses, so my chanting will be of no use only. What is the use of chanting? What is the use of chanting? But it's not like that. Even offensive chanting has potency. It has potency. If there's a dangerous animal in the jungle, there's a lion or a tiger or a cheetah, and there is a person who has a gun. Now what happens is, imagine that the person has never practiced shooting. And doesn't know how to shoot, take target and shoot properly. But just the gun itself, it creates a little fear in the animal. And when the gun is shot, it creates a sound. And that sound can scare the animal and the animal will go away. Now, if I think, but just because of the sound, the animal has gone away, now the animal is dead and I am safe, then what will happen? Boom! The animal will pounce back and kill afterwards. But just the sound of the gun shooting is also enough to cause the animal to check temporarily. So, our chanting is like that. See, lust is like that lion or a tiger, you can say. So, even if we are not very attentive, even if our chanting is not pure, what happens is, just the utterance of the holy names causes those desires to go away temporarily. But our mistake is, we think, oh, I am not troubled by lust. Now, I have become a pure devotee. Then what happens is, boom, the lion, tiger comes back and attacks again. So, right now, there has been some decrease. There has been some decrease in lust, some decrease in greed, some decrease in anger. But that decrease is not because all those desires have been eliminated. They have just been checked. And we need the weapon, we need the holy name, so that, and by repeated shooting, eventually we will hit the target. And then those desires will get eradicated. So one extreme is to think that, I don't know how to shoot in target, I don't know how to chant purely, so there's no use of chanting. That is one extreme. That is pessimistic. And that will make us feel, what is the use of practicing? But actually, by our own experience, we'll ourselves see some days, when we chant seriously, attentively, we really feel strengthened after chanting. We feel confident. We feel empowered. Yes, I'm feeling so confident. We get the effect. That, on the other hand, so that is true, that even at our level, chanting is beneficial. So to think that chanting doesn't have any benefit, that is unnecessary pessimism. But at the other extreme is to think that because I have chanted and now I don't feel any temptation, so I have become a pure devotee. No, that is an illusion. That is overconfidence. If we start thinking like that, all that has happened is that these desires have been checked and they will come back again. So when we when we have faith in the process of chanting, and at the same time we also have humility, that whatever purification I have got, it is not because those desires have been eliminated, they have just been checked. And eventually if I keep practicing, then they will become eliminated. But till then, because I have to check, I have to keep practicing chanting, I have to keep practicing sadhana, then eventually they will become eliminated. That's how we will move from the level of Shapradhanam to Namabhas to Shuddhanam. And then one will become, so then Prabhupada talks about the various stages of bhakti, and he says how one comes to the level of pure Krishna consciousness gradually. He says one comes to the level of Anartha Nivritti, then Bhajana Kriya, Bhava, and then one comes to Prema. And finally he says, he quotes this famous verse, Krishna Surya Sama Maya hai andhakar कार यहाँ कृष्ण ताहा नहीं न ताहा नहीं माया अधिकार. So he says that Krishna is like the sun, Maya is like darkness. So wherever there is Krishna, the son of Krishna, there is no possibility of darkness. So this was actually the motto that Prabhupada made for Back to God also. Where there is light, Godhead is light. When there is no nations, where there is Godhead. So now what does this mean? This indicates both the potency as well as the dynamism of bhakti. The potency in the sense that When light is turned on, darkness cannot stay. So when we invoke Krishna's presence in our heart, illusion and temptation will have to go away. So this is the potency of bhakti. But at the same time, it's dynamism. Dynamism is what? Now, as soon as the light goes off, immediately darkness will come. The converse is also true. That means as soon as we become Krishna unconscious, then the temptations will start coming up. And it's only a matter of time that the temptations will drag us down. It may not happen that the temptations will drag us down immediately. Temptations will come and they will tempt us. And as they tempt us more and more and more, eventually we'll be dragged down. So this is both the dynamism and the potency and the dynamism. Potency means it works. But dynamism means it's not something which is like, once I surrender to Krishna, that surrender is forever. No, I have to keep choosing day after day, month after month. In fact, moment after moment, I have to keep choosing. And if I choose Maya, then I go away from Krishna. If I choose Krishna, then I move towards Krishna. Now, to conclude this, one last point with respect to the chanting of the holy names. There is the concept of taste for chanting. Now, sometimes we say that actually we should chant only for Krishna's pleasure. Now, Haridas Thakur had said he chanted for Krishna's pleasure. So then we also talk about taste for chanting, isn't it? Then if I talk about taste, am I not talking about my pleasure? So then how am I being selfless? So actually, I hope the question is clear here, what I'm saying. At one level we say that we should chant only for Krishna's pleasure. Then we also say that by chanting regularly we'll get taste. Then by taste, aren't we talking about our own pleasure? My pleasure I'm getting. Actually, how it is, the taste at the pure level is a taste for our pleasure through Krishna's pleasure. That means when we talk about the taste of chanting, it is, we chant in such a way that our chanting pleases Krishna. And when Krishna is pleased, just as when the stomach is nourished, all the body's limbs get nourished. Similarly, we also get nourished. That is the taste at the highest level. Before that, there is also the taste that Krishna gives by his mercy. So, there is Rati and there is Ratyabhas. That means there's taste which comes before. Sometimes we may happen that when there is some very, very beautiful class, or there is some very ecstatic kirtan, or there's some very enchanting darshan, we may also sometimes feel like such overwhelming emotions in our heart. We may feel like tears coming from our eyes. Then we may wonder, is this sahajiyaik, that I know I am not pure. I know that I get other kind of emotions also. Lust, anger, greed are not yet gone. So how are these emotions coming? So it's not that those emotions are necessarily false. Now, just as there is Rati, just as there is Nam and there is Namabhas. Namabhas actually refers to the sun and the initial rays of the rising sun. Similarly, there is Rati and there is Ratyabhas. Ratyabhas means that which is the pure taste. Before the pure taste comes, there is also the glimpse of the taste which comes. So when we get the glimpse of that taste, the devotee understands that this is a precursor given by Krishna to me of what will come in the future. So we don't deny, if we get those experiences of taste and devotion, even when we are not yet become selfless, we don't dismiss them as sahajiyaik, but nor do we mistake them as proofs of our spiritual advancement. Now, it's not that just because I got some tears, now I become a pure devotee. No, that's okay. If we got them, that's wonderful. We are grateful to Krishna for giving us those experiences. But those experiences are meant to push us forward towards Krishna. They are not proofs of our spiritual advancements. They are precursors to our spiritual advancement. Proofs means I have already become spiritual advanced. Precursor means they are what will come in the future. They are sort of advanced glimpses which we will get, so that we will pursue and we will come to that. So at our level, we don't have to bother so much whether I am getting taste or not. Nor do we have to bother so much whether I am totally selfless or not. The most important stage at our level is to continue practicing devotion. If we continue practicing devotion, gradually the selflessness will come and gradually the pure taste will come. If we just keep practicing continuously, then what will happen? We just keep forth, then the mind will realize, okay, as I said in the beginning, yeah, this actually gives me happiness, much better happiness than other things that I am doing. So let me continue this, and eventually the mind will become fixed in Krishna. So this is how we get to the stage of Shuddhanam, and we relish the sweetness of the holy name, and the disease gets uprooted completely. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Mind fixation. So are you talking about timing in terms of, say, we should chant japa early in the morning, or what exactly do you mean by time? Okay. Yeah. So is it that if we chant all the 16 rounds at one time, there is greater concentration by that, or say we chant in intervals so that there is greater concentration? See, normally our dealing with the mind is like a war, and in a war you cannot go with a stereotyped single strategy all the time. If the enemy attacks in a different way, I can't say that I will use, yesterday I used this weapon and it was successful, but today the enemy had got a counter for that weapon, and now what do? I will just keep using that weapon? No, it doesn't work like that. So it's a dynamic war. So when a war is going on, we have to find out the weapon that works and use it. So that means, normally speaking, we would like to absorb ourselves more and more in chanting. And the whole idea of mantra meditation is to actually experience a higher reality. Now we are having this sensory reality around us, but the holy name has the capacity to transport us to a higher reality. This is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he would chant, who would experience Vrindavan. So now we may not experience Vrindavan, but we can experience a greater sense of peace, a greater connection with something higher. At our level, what is our experience? If a child is sleeping, and when the child is sleeping, it's very cold. So when it's very cold, and maybe there is a fire in the room, the fire has become extinguished. The child starts freezing. Then somebody comes and then starts the fire again. And the child starts feeling warm. The child is still, eyes are closed, and the child may not be aware, is not aware who is there. But the child knows, oh, I'm not feeling warm. Earlier I was feeling freezing, now I started feeling warm. So, although the eyes are not open and the person is not able to perceive what is the source of the warmth, but one feels the warmth. So like that, at our level, when we start chanting the holy names, we don't perceive Krishna directly. But we start feeling that peace, that calm, that warmth, that sort of deeper pleasure. We don't know what it is actually. We may not perceive, because our spiritual eyes are still closed. We don't perceive the Tribhanga Lalita form of Krishna. But just that sense of peace, that sense of calmness, that sense of clarity, that sense of sort of power that comes by chanting, that indeed it's like the warmth of the fire. Somebody is there who is tending the fire, and that's why now the room has become warm. So like that, there is someone because of which this holy name is giving me this effect. So at our level, the experience of the potency of the holy name may not be direct. We may not see the holy name as not different from Krishna, but still we experience its effect. So our goal is what? Just like the sleeping person who wakes up and they say, oh, my father is there. The child wakes up and says, oh, my mother is there, my father is there. They are tending to this, and they are keeping me warm and comfortable and safe. So like that, we wake up spiritually, and then we realize, oh, Krishna is right here next to me. So our goal when we are chanting is actually to rise to a higher level of reality. And the best way to rise to the higher level of reality is if we chant continuously. So when we chant continuously a substantial amount of time, then it's easier to rise to that higher level of reality. But the important point is rising to the higher level of reality. So if I'm very distracted, if I'm not able to concentrate, the mind is troubling me too much, then it's better that, okay, instead of chanting 16 rounds, I chant 8 rounds, 10 rounds. Then maybe I wash my face, or no, I recite some verses. Actually, just instead of just trying to, sometimes what, as I said, it's a war. Although the holy name is the best weapon, but still, sometimes it may be helpful to use some other weapon so that we calm the mind down a little bit. Otherwise, just keep chanting, nothing happens. Just if the mind is just wandering too much, just calm down, take a few deep breaths, and slow down. That calms down, and then we can sort of again begin using the holy name, chanting the holy name, and controlling the mind. Or sometimes you just wash the face a little bit. There are different ways. So the holy name is supremely powerful, but sometimes the mind prevents us from accessing the power of the holy name only. Once I access the power, the mind will become controlled. But the mind doesn't allow me to access the power sometimes. So then I may have to use some other things. So sometimes reciting some verses about the holy name, what that does is that brings the intellect into the picture. So you can control the mind at the spiritual level through the holy name. But you can also control the mind to some extent at the intellectual level by chanting. So when you control the mind at the intellectual level by chanting, then by that we recite some verses about the holy name, something from Shikshashtakam, something from scripture about how potent the holy name is. That calms the mind down a little bit. And then we are able to access the power of the holy name. So our focus should be on making sure that we connect with Krishna. So now what is the way to connect with Krishna? That is not a stereotype thing. That some devotees, every Ekadashi they will chant 64 rounds. Or some devotees they will chant 192 rounds. And they make it a rule. And they make it, now, it's good to chant extra rounds if one can. But one has to see, am I remembering Krishna? If I'm not really remembering Krishna, if my chanting is just becoming a number counting exercise, then it's better that I engage myself in other ways. Because, of course, we want to chant 16 rounds because that's our initiation vow. But beyond that, extra chanting may not always be beneficial. Because the point is not just counting the number of the holy names. The point is connecting with Krishna. And sometimes studying the philosophy, sometimes doing some practical services, or discussing with devotees, or taking darshan of the deities, singing Vaishnava songs, participating in kirtans. There are many other ways in which we will be able to connect more effectively with Krishna. That's why we see that there are, although the Yuga Dharma is chanting, there are 9 forms of devotional service. And Rupa Goswami used 64 items of devotional service. So even among the 64 items, the holy name is important, but still he used 5 potent forms of devotional service. So there is no rule. In general, if you are staying in the ashram, we have a time for chanting. And generally, if you are in the association of devotees and we are chanting, it's good to chant at that time itself. But the important point is that we connect with Krishna. So for connecting with Krishna, if we feel that maybe after some devotees, after 3 or 4 rounds, they take a little break and then they recite some verses of Shikshashtakam just to get the mind back on focus and then to remember the glory of the holy name, and then we chant, that's perfectly okay. So it's a war. Whatever works for us, we have to use. We have to adopt that strategy. We can't go into the war with a stereotype strategy. This is how I'll fight. No, we have to see what is the way the mind is distracting us and what is the way to counter the distraction, connect with Krishna and act accordingly. Okay? Okay. So the question is that when we chant, there is one way to just focus on the holy name, the other is to have a sticker of the holy name, the another can be that we look at the deities. So is there any one that is the best? Actually, Krishna is Shabda Brahma. He's manifesting as the holy names. The best chanting is where we absorb ourselves only in the sound of the holy name. But what is best may not be the best at our stage. That means if I just try to absorb myself in the holy name, I just get hyper distracted and I get nowhere. So there is a point of concentration and then there is a circle of concentration. The point of concentration is the sound of the holy name. The circle of concentration is things connected with the holy name which can bring our thoughts back to the holy name. So the letters of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, or even some scriptural verses, some quotes about the glory of the holy name, the picture of the deities, these are all, or maybe for some devotee it is the picture of their taking initiation. I made a vow to the spiritual master that I'll be chanting 16 rounds. That picture can also help. So these are all what? They are within the circle of concentration. They are things connected with the holy name which will help us bring our consciousness back to the holy name again. So for most of us at our level, fixing the mind on that point of concentration, just the sound of the holy name, is quite difficult. We try to do that, the mind wanders in too many different places. So it's good that at least we keep it within the circle of concentration. So find out that those things which are connected with the holy name, which help us bring the mind back to the holy name. But the important point is, from the circle of concentration, the mind should move inwards, not outwards. That means if I'm looking at the deities, and I look at, oh, Krishna is wearing yellow dhoti. Hey, where did I put my dhoti for drying? And then the mind just goes off from that circle of concentration. That we have to be careful. So, of course, that is the vigilance is always required, whether it is point of concentration or circle of concentration. But with the circle of concentration, the vigilance is, the exercise, the exertion of the vigilance is lesser, because we have a little bit more scope for keeping the mind connected with Krishna. So I wouldn't say that necessarily one is better than the other, that looking at the deities is at a higher or a lower level than looking at the Hare Krishna Mahamantra sticker. The important point is that different people have different kinds of intelligences. Now, some people, when they go and take darshan of the deities, they can remember, oh, Krishna had this kind of cap, and Krishna had this kind of dress, and Krishna had this kind of this and that. Others may not be able to remember. It's not necessarily that one who remembers has higher devotion and other has lesser devotion. It's just that different people have different kinds of intelligences. So we have to find out what is our intelligence and what is the way we can connect with Krishna. So the people who have more of a visual intelligence, for them looking at the deity of Krishna may help them to remember Krishna more better by looking at the deities. Others may have more of a verbal intelligence. Then having some words written, some quotes or some verses, that may act as a spur for remembering Krishna. So whatever works, we have to use that. Okay? Thank you very much. One more question, last question. Okay, you have more questions? 1, 2. You also have a question. Okay, what is the time? 6:40. 6:46. Okay, what we'll do is, okay, you can tell the question. If it's short, I'll answer the question. Otherwise, we'll have the questions tomorrow. Is it okay? Not tomorrow, Monday. Yeah.
These people also spreading jihad, so continuously bombarding their own philosophy. So, but my question is, so if only mind accept that time, if so we get realization, but they are also accepting by continuously.
Okay.
But they are not following them also.
Yes. Okay, it's a big question. I'll answer the remaining 2 questions tomorrow. I'll just answer this question now. So we say that whenever there's something is repeated again and again, then by repetition we get realization. Repeatedly fixing the mind on Krishna, we'll develop a taste for Krishna. But also said that by practicing dharma we get realization. And now we see that repetition can lead to faith in things which are false also. In advertisements, same things repeatedly people are exposed, people start believing in that. Or there are fanatical terrorists, they are bombarded about jihad and about heaven, about Jannat where they will enjoy, and they start believing that. So they are not in any way connected with dharma. So how is it? Actually, that repetition leads to transformation of one's conceptions. That is a psychological truth. That's not a spiritual truth. Psychological truth means Krishna talks dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu upajayate. So whatever we are exposed to, we get attracted to that. That's a psychological principle that applies at the level of sattva-guna, rajoguna, tamoguna, all levels. So if a person is repeatedly exposed to something, that person will start believing it. That is a psychological principle. Now, whether that psychological principle will lead a person towards truth or towards illusion will depend on what is it that one is exposed to. So, if one is exposed to that which is truth, then that psychological principle will take us towards truth. That's why the criteria of something being true is not just whether I am convinced about it or not. Now, there can be in one sense, there can be a sincere atheist. You know what do you mean by sincere atheist? That person, sincere, not in the sense that the person is an open-minded quest for truth, but sincere in the sense that the person deeply believes that there is no God. What has happened? That person has been exposed again and again and again to that particular that kind of stimuli. Krishna says in 17th chapter, Shraddha mayoyam purusho yoyaj shraddha saevasaha. In 17.3 he says that we are made by our shraddha. Shraddha mayoyam purusho. We are all made of our shraddha, and yoyaj shraddha saevasaha. As is one's faith, that is the very nature of the person. That is how we become. So Krishna is talking about a causal connection over here. First is, he says, we are nothing but our faith, and as our faith is, so we become in future. So he's talking it both ways. That's why it's important that the authorities, in terms of the sages, the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas, they create systems by which people are exposed to truth and not exposed to illusion. If people are exposed to illusion, then they will go into deeper illusion. And that's why Kali Yuga is very dangerous. Prabhupada would call Kali Yuga as a soul-killing civilization, the modern civilization. Why? Because people are exposed to untruth in a very organized and systematic way. And that's why it's a very dangerous age. So now when we are talking about dharma leading to realization, that is talking about the realization of the truth. So by the dharma also is what? Dharma essentially is repetition. Dharma means my chanting 16 rounds or doing my deity worship, doing different activities. That is dharma. The repetition again and again and again and again do it. Then what will happen by that? Gradually I'll get realization. That means that which is a reality, I will understand it to be a reality. That is realization. So repetition will lead to transformation of one's conceptions. That is a universal truth. But when the repetition is of a truth, then the transformation will take a person towards that which is the actual reality. Okay? Thank you very much. Shri Updeshamrit ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Itai Gaur Premanande.